It's 3 a.m. and masked men kick in your door. They drag you and your spouse and your children out of the house, handcuff you and your spouse before throwing you on the cement, and then zip tie your children, sitting them on the curb. As you are pushed into the back of a rental truck, you hear your children screaming, begging these masked men to let you go. The gate comes down, and as the truck begins to move, you hear the driver and the passenger speaking Spanish to one another. You begin to wonder, how does one human being do this to another? The answer is dehumanization. Dehumanization is redefining an oppressed population's basic humanity into something less than the oppressor's humanity. It's often used to justify the exploitation, enslavement, and mass murder of entire indigenous populations by colonizing forces. All human beings are inclined to exercise their own free will in their lives. This is a major problem for colonizing forces. In order to maintain control over the territory and the indigenous populations, they have to remove the basic inclination to exercise one's free will. If the indigenous populations exercise free will and unite with one another, it could lead to resistance and possible rebellion. By reducing the complexities of an indigenous population's humanity, it allows the oppressor to treat them like animals. Colonizers often depicted indigenous populations as capable of experiencing primary emotions like fear, anxiety, or simply responding to an external stimulus like animals would. But they didn't give the indigenous populations the consideration of secondary emotions, self-reflection, the feeling of terror based off of death of their loved ones, the very essence of what allows humans to be different from animals. In addition to a lack of intellectualism, intelligence, and emotional capacity, colonizers often depicted indigenous populations with a greater capacity for physical labor. This justified enslaving indigenous populations, citing that they were simply better at physical labor than the colonizers were. The atrocities and brutalities of dehumanization only work in the short term. You see, colonizer oppressor forces knew that if they mass murdered all of the indigenous populations, their workforce would essentially vanish over time. This is where settler colonialism comes into play, and it's a very, very dark story and an explanation as to one of the cultural identity dilemmas that are happening in America today. Settler colonialism is the forced assimilation and mixing of bloodlines between colonizer and the oppressed. The result is a new generation that emerges, whose cultural narrative is easily erased and rewritten, defined by the colonizer empire. In the modern era, we see this cultural identity dilemma play out across indigenous American and Latin American communities. Oftentimes, these younger generations are influenced by state propaganda, even joining enforcement agencies that actively terrorize their own people. So the next time you see a Latin American ICE officer arresting and terrorizing his own people, remind him of his ancestors that were shackled, enslaved, and terrorized by the very empire that signs his checks.